All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning to those of you who are in States right now. My name is Ksenia Svetlova. I'm the CEO of ROPES, and I'm welcoming you to the very special webinar, which is basically a cooperation, a collaboration between ourselves, ROPES, the Regional Organization for Peace, Economics and Security, and Buhuth, Dubai Public Policy Research Center. Our webinar's name is The Arab States, the Gaza War, and the Path to Peace. And I would like to introduce our fabulous panelists who will be discussing with me today the situation on the ground, but also perspective for stabilization in our region and the way out of the current impasse toward two-state solution and reconciliation. So first of all, I would like to introduce Ghaith Al-Omari, who is a Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert Foundation Senior Fellow in the Washington Institute, Arvin Levy Family Program on the U.S.-Israel Strategic Relation. He is also the former Executive Director of the American Task Force on Palestine. Born and raised in Jordan, Ghaith Al-Omari served as advisor to the Palestinian negotiation team during the 1999-2001 permanent status talks, in addition to holding various other positions within the Palestinian Autonomy. My dear friend, Ambassador Hisham Youssef is a career diplomat with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Egypt. Between 2014 and 2019, he served as Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian, Cultural, and Social Affairs of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and completed his term in July 2019. From 2001 to 2014, Hisham Youssef served as a senior official in the Arab League, office official spokesman, and later the chief of staff to Secretary General Amr Moussa. He also was a senior advisor to the Secretary General of the Arab League, Dr. Nabil El-Arabi, on issues pertaining to crisis management, as well as the reform of the Arab League. Youssef is now a senior fellow in the U.S. Institute of Peace. And the last, but certainly not the least, Mohammed Baroun is the Director General of the Dubai Public Policy Research Center, Buhuth, established in 2002 in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. Mohammed Baroun pursued a career in media as a reporter for Al Arabi magazine and Al Ittihad newspaper, and then as an editor for Gulf Defense magazine, before starting as a director of research for Buhuth and focusing on the interplay between geostrategy and political making in governance, stability, capacity, building, and future-proofing. Baroun has also worked as the deputy director of Watani, the United Arab Emirates' first initiative on national identity, and is also founding member of the board of the Boussoula Institute, a think tank in Brussels that focuses on the changing and emerging aspects of partnership between the EU and the GCC member states. Dear friends, thank you very much for your participation, and it's an honor to host you all in this virtual platform. As we're discussing the tragic events of these days, the war in Gaza that is now lasting for right now for 9 months, and the current impasse that right now we are witnessing, I would like first of all to ask each of you to talk for just a few minutes about your perspective from the heart of their world, or the perspective from Washington for many of you on the current state of affairs in the battlefield in Gaza and the way out of it. And especially, I would like you to focus on the question, what kind of role the Arab world could play in finding the right solution, not for temporary ceasefires, not for temporary solutions that will not hold, but for a permanent and steady solution for generations, for Israelis, Palestinians, and everybody else here in our region. And I would like to start with you, Mohammed Baroun, please. The microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Tina, for the, first of all, the fabulous invitation to be with very dear friends, including yourself, and also to discuss a painful issue. Your question is, what is the role of the Arab world? And in my view, the Arab world is like a huge engine that is lacking a spark plug ignition. And I think that ignition would come from Israel, which is an acknowledgement of, a desire to establish a state in Palestine. I think that will change a lot of things in the current position on Gaza, but also on a number of issues. In my view, this is easier said than done. One of the major issues that there is a duality of understanding two concepts, peace and security. And peace is everlasting. It does not need, it's itself generating its own security. Security need to be held sometimes at getting point, sometimes at a wall, but it needs a lot of effort to maintain it. And as we have learned, it's not always something that you can secure. And the question that we always have since what started in the 7th of October, but didn't definitely end there, is that, is Israel a partner in peace or is it a partner in security? So this was the first question that, led a number of discussions. The second one is that we talk a lot about Gaza right now, but can we really isolate Gaza from Palestine? And again, we get into this SOS, as I call it, situation. SOS security will always be a problem as long occupation lasts. That means we need a settlement. So between security, occupation, and settlement, what is our pathway? And pathways has always been either a one-state, two-state, or a multi-state. That is an agreement on some sort of a confederation. But all of them start with this way of state. So we need an investment in a state. Currently, the discussion is focused on Gaza governance, and is also evident in the title of the session. But to me, Gaza governance is like the 7 blind men trying to describe an elephant. And there are 7 different views of what governance means. First view you would hear from many people is that, well, this concept of governance is actually occupation in disguise, because there will always be, or at least this is what we're hearing from the Israeli government, for the foreseeable future, there will have to be some sort of an Israeli military presence. And that would translate to occupation. Another blind man would say, no, actually governance here means de-Hamasification. It's a process that is designed, geared to take all of the Hamas operatives out of Gaza, and that's the only reason or rationale for that operation. Others would say, no, governance here is a financial support, because there is a lot of reconstruction that has to be done. The international world, of course, Israel wouldn't want to pay for it, so we will need other people to pay for it. So that's the word reconstruction comes as governance. And there are people who would say, no, governance is, that's a fourth blind man, would say governance is actually security provision. So we need people to hold guns instead of Israeli holding guns. Those could be Arab guns, could be international guns, could be tribal guns, Palestinian guns, but end of the day, it's someone who holds the security. Another blind man would say, no, actually governance here is blue. This is an internationalization of the Gaza situation and possibly the whole Palestinian issue. We will have a red flag state, and the international community would come in and rule. Another blind person would say governance actually here is garbage collection. It's sewage, it's cleanup. And this is what Israel doesn't want to do and wants others to do it. And eighth blind man, that could be me, governance here is an investment in statehood. And if we have a means to invest in the statehood of Palestine through Gaza governance, that could be a pathway to the future. And I think this is where the Arab states could come in. They could become the guarantor of any peace deal between Israel and Palestine. And I think this is embodied in the Arab Peace Initiative, started by late King Fahd, where the immediate acceptance of Israel as a state is based on an acceptance of Israel as a state. But what's more important is that the guarantors in this way, those who are going to guarantee the peace of Israelis and the peace of the Palestinians, are going to be the Arab states. And I think this is the silver lining in the cloud that is over our head right now, is that we can see this situation we're in as a gateway to start an investment in statehood. And I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Muhammad. You described so colorfully this gathering of the blind men. I can almost envisage it in almost, I can put any names inside and it will be right for that as for international leadership, unfortunately, at the time. Ambassador Youssef, with your vast experience working as a top diplomat in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in the Arab League, in the Organization of Islamic Conference, so, you were talking to many times, as I recall, also to our audiences with ropes about the willingness of the Arab world to, play the stabilizing role. And basically their peace initiative, as Muhammad just mentioned, is fashioned around, this principle. And the first Arab peace initiative of King Fahd, was also something that, was definitely, in this direction. The question is, given the turbulent atmosphere and the problems that the Arab world is facing since, the last, I would say, 20 years, the war in Iraq, the Arab Spring, the turmoil that followed it, the rise of ISIS and so on, we see that, a lot of the attention is consumed by, the other problems, the internal problems that are, of course, important. Do you think that there is, again, right now is the right time for the Arab world to step in and say, well, we are going to do it? And my extra follow-up question is about the possibility for the peacekeeping force that President Biden had discussed a few times. And this is something that is being also discussed a lot in Israel. Do you see a probability for such a scenario for the current time?
Well, thank you, Ksenia, for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be with Mohammed Haroun and Ghaith Al-Omari. We are at a very critical moment. And as Mohammed said, the Arab world is willing to work on all kinds of issues. The question is, what is the mandate and what is the framework? Now, we have a difficulty because we have a coalition in Israel that has been resisting a ceasefire for many months. Now, the positive thing is that this time around, the effort that is currently ongoing, in my view, is the most serious effort taken so far, despite the fact that there has been a number of Security Council resolutions, a number of General Assembly resolutions. But my feeling is that this time the effort is much stronger, and it is hoping to achieve progress in a short period of time. We will see whether this will materialize or not, because sadly, the Prime Minister of Israel keeps insisting that he wants a freedom to return to war at any point in time. And this is causing a difficulty. There are other difficulties as well associated to security and otherwise. So you were asking about peacekeeping forces. Peacekeeping forces, what would be the mandate? If the mandate is what Israel has been arguing for a number of months, that we want a force to finish the job, then nobody would be willing to go. There will be no boots on the ground in order to continue the objective that Israel had, which is ending Hamas. A number of Arab countries have been trying to persuade Israel and the US for many months that terminating Hamas is not possible, and it cannot be dealt with through military means and force alone. The only way, in my view, to overcome difficulties associated with Hamas is exactly what Muhammad Bahoun was saying, to advance towards peace. You mentioned, and he mentioned, the Arab Peace Initiative and the Fahd Plan before that in the early 80s. So the Arab world has been moving in this direction, trying to see what would happen. Now, we have a coalition in Israel that has no answers in relation to how the situation would be governed immediately after the war, whether it's in relation to governance, security, reconstruction, all kinds of issues. And the United States have been pleading with the current coalition to come up with a plan. And until today, there is no real plan as to what would happen next. And there is also no real plan in relation to what you mentioned earlier about a final settlement. And as far as we are concerned, and the international community is concerned, since October 7th until today, everybody is talking about enough is enough. We have to end this conflict, and we have to end it in accordance with what is recognized by the international community as the final settlement, which is a two-state solution in one form or another. We're not saying that this can happen tomorrow. We're not saying in a year or two, but we have to have a political horizon that indicates that this is the direction in which we're going, and we want to see how we can achieve this objective. And there has been some progress. So Israel was saying, well, the Arab world wants to get rid of us and so on. And you have seen the Abraham Accords and how this also sent the message to Israel, that Israel is accepted in the region. And what is missing is a solution of the Palestinian question. And as a result of what is happening today, the relations even between the Abraham Accords countries have declined. And relations between Israel and both Egypt and Jordan, that are, as far as I'm concerned, the critical neighbors of Israel, have deteriorated to a degree that has not been witnessed since the peace treaties were signed between both Israel and Egypt and Israel and Jordan. So we have to square this circle. We have to square this circle through a clear vision as to how we can achieve this objective of advancing the prospects of peace, especially that also reconstruction was mentioned. The whole world is sending a message to Israel that we will not rebuild Gaza for it to be destroyed again. This happened many times before, and it will not happen again, because we want something that is credible, reliable, time-bound, in order for us to be able to do that time and again, because this should not be repeated. And I think this has to be addressed in the coming months.
I will just add, Ambassador, that certainly this message should be addressed also at the Hamas, for them to understand that you cannot just jeopardize time and again stability and security, whether it's in Gaza or in the West Bank.
Absolutely, absolutely. But then in order to do that, then you have to give the Palestinian people hope that there is peace that can be achieved. And at that point in time, Hamas will not be a problem. Hamas is a difficulty. Of course it is. But at the same time, as you well know, Hamas's popularity is on the decline. Why? Because the Palestinians, particularly in Gaza, have seen everything that they own destroyed. So, and Hamas realizes that. Hamas is, they're not stupid. No, they do realize that there is a problem and it has to be addressed.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And my next question is to you, dear Raif. You combine, so many hats. I, have a difficulty from which to start, but you're a negotiator, you're a scholar, and I would like to basically make this leap between the time when you negotiated and unfortunately, these efforts did not succeed at the time. Perhaps the time wasn't right. Perhaps both of the parties were not ripe for this really big move. Both societies were not able to comprehend it. 20 years later, now it's almost actually 30 years later. Do you think that there is a chance that after Abraham Accords, after the night of the Iranian Star Wars, when we saw how Arab countries, they defended themselves, but also they contributed to defense of Israel as well. The situation can change around. What changed during this time?
First of all, thanks, Ksenia, and it's really great to be with three good friends. Before I get to your question, I want to emphasize 2 points that my colleagues mentioned. And really, it's worth it. I mean, look, this Israeli government's fantasy that the Arab world is going to come and basically resolve Israel's problem in Gaza and assume the problem for themselves ain't going to happen. The Arab countries, yes, they're willing to play a role, but the role has to be based on a certain framework. And I think this is a message that has to be very clear to the Israeli audience, because I still hear Israeli officials talking about some fantasy that the Arabs will come in. Ain't going to happen. And the same, by the way, with Hamas. I think, I think many of the Hamas supporters and Hamas members mistake the sympathy that Arab, both publics and leaders, have with the Palestinians and assume it's sympathy with Hamas. I do believe that Hamas has, in many ways, alienated many of the leaderships. Now, to your question, and I want to link it to our topic, which is the Arab world. I think, look, we can spend hours talking about why the previous negotiations failed, partly because of domestic reasons. And by the way, here, I would say the domestic situation now in Israel and among the Palestinians is worse than I have ever seen. So to think that we're going to have a successful negotiating anytime soon is, I think, a bit of a stretch. But also, I think one thing that October 7th and the war has shown, actually two things. First of all, it has shown that simply managing the problem doesn't work. I would go to, the cool Israel, Tel Aviv, Haifa, etc. You will talk to people there, and you think that the Palestinian issue is happening on a different continent. So I think this, in a very bloody and tragic way, brought the need to resolve it to the Israelis, but I think to the Palestinians. And here, building on what Hisham said, I think once the dust settles, it will show that the violence that Hamas and the terror that Hamas conducted is also not a way to move forward. Look, two of the problems that have faced the peace process during my time, one was the fact that the Arab world was basically marginalized. I remember in Camp David, basically the Arab world was kept out of the loop. When we ended up with a crisis in Camp David, that's when President Clinton remembered to call President Mubarak, etc. And you know what? If you're going to ignore me all along and bring me in when there's a problem, no, thank you very much. So I think this time, I think the Arab world is very different. I think we're seeing a much more proactive, much more interesting Arab world. And we also see an Arab world that has felt the real practical implications of the lack of resolution of this conflict, whether in terms of its economic impact, the Red Sea navigation, etc., or the political impact, the instability we see in many Arab countries, Jordan, Morocco, etc. So there is a motivator. But another reason, I think, why the peace process did not succeed in the past was the fact that I would argue, Israel, of course, has had its own share of blame. But on the Palestinian side, I believe we were not in a situation throughout the peace process in which we can say that the Palestinians could have actually built a successful, stable state if a peace deal was built. There was issues of capabilities, of legitimacy, of corruption, of governance, these kind of issues. And I think this is where, the Arab world now can play an interesting role. Yes, the Arab world can, as I think Mohammed and Hisham both said, can come in as a guarantor of a two-state solution. But I think the Arab world can do something else. Today, if you look at the Arab world, particularly if you look at the Gulf, there have been some very, very impressive developments in terms of building successful governance. A theory of legitimacy based on the provision of prosperity, security, stability, etc. Governments which are effective, clean, responsive. And I think this is something that is really missing in the Palestinian case. I think, as Mohammed said, you cannot look at the Gaza governance in isolation of larger Palestinian governance. And as we look at building up a Palestinian side in a future negotiation, I think the Arab world can play a very important role in building the capacity of governance in the Palestinian system. This does not mean taking over the agency of Palestinians. I don't think anyone wants to do that. But also being very clear in doing this, in saying to the Palestinians, you have to get your act together if you want to play a role. And let me conclude with this one last word, especially about the GCC. Traditionally, and unfortunately until today, we look at the GCC, and many, including in the United States, look at the GCC as an ATM, basically a cash provider. I think we should move beyond this. The GCC has its own priority. Each country has its own priority. We have to respect that. But also we have to accept that these countries have provided something much more than financial assistance, expertise, capability, homegrown theory of governance that can come in. Again, one last point. In this whole context, we also have to keep in mind that while, yes, it's very impressive that the Arabs have managed in the diplomatic level to create a unified message, and we see it in the Arab Foreign Ministers meeting, we have to keep in mind that there are serious tensions within the Arab world, and without addressing these tensions, then it's very hard to see how we can have unified, smooth, building on Muhammad's engine analogy, an engine that is not only has a spark, but an engine that actually all the parts are working in the same direction.
Thank you very much for that, Raif. Yeah, I hope that the next time will not take place in another 25 years or so, 25 years of wars, blood, and I invite each and every one of the listeners and viewers of our webinar to address your questions to our Q&A box, and we will try to take as much as possible. You can address specific questions to each and every one of our panelists, or you can send general questions. And we have some, that were sent already to different Ropes Media, but it will be much easier, guys, if you will just send them to either the chat or the Q&A, and then we will be able to go over them together. So I would like to go to our next round of questions. And Muhammad, I would like to start again with you and to ask you about the public opinion in regards not only to normalization. Yes, so because I know that this kind of things change just like poll changes from one week to another, but to the general opportunity of solving the Israeli-Palestinian problem, the conflict in the lines of the two-state solution. Because we do see that in Palestinian polls, their support for the two-state solution is dropping dramatically. And each time, my friends in Israel tell me, listen, but very soon you will not have a party with whom you would be able to promote the two-state solution that you so much believe in. So I would like to ask you what is happening on your end in United Arab Emirates, in the Gulf in general, and in the Arab world. Is there still a vision that two-state solution is possible?
I would say that is extremely difficult to find any other solution possible. If we talk about a one state, that one state is possibility as long as it's not a Jewish state. Because if it's a Jewish state, then you cannot have equal rights for everyone, Christians, Muslims, and others. So this is a problematic issue. But if you're talking about a confederation or a multi-state, if you want, it will have to start with a state. So there has to be a unit, a state that join forces with other states and create a confederation, which has been the case with all of the confederations in the US, in the UK, even here in the UAE. So you have to start with the state. There is, in my view, and in many that I've been talking to, there is no other solution. And that's why people think it's a cliche and you're just knowing it. It's not a cliche. It's the only path for security, because without a Palestinian state, we have occupation. If we have occupation, then we will always have a Hamas-like operation. Hamas is not an Islamic group. It's a resistance group. This is how it positions itself very well right now. Very few people would look at Hamas only as either Muslim Brotherhood or an Islamic. They are an occupation, and this is international law. And this is the problem we're facing when, for instance, someone like the Israeli representative in the UN tears up the charter of the UN. It's problematic because we've partnered with Israel through the Abrahamic Accords, and before us, Egypt and Jordan, as a partner in peace, not a partner in security. And if you're not going to allow peace, you will not solve the occupation through a settlement, you'll always have a security problem. You've talked about, and I think Hisham also mentioned this idea of Hamas being, a problem. And yes, it is a problem, continue to be a problem as long as there is occupation. So, the only way to deal with occupation is to provide a state to the Palestinians. And I think this is the one thing that people have been talking about. And honestly, there hasn't been any, justification, at least a plausible justification to why Israel refuses a state. Because if it wants security, that would provide security. If it wants access to all of the Arab Islamic surrounding, that what will provide the access to all of them. And this has been proved through the Abrahamic Accord that it's a viable access. Abrahamic Accord provided Israel with a break of its isolation imposed by Arab and Islamic countries because of the occupation, and had shown how could this reach all the way to India, to China, to Japan, to Korea. So there is a good example that this can actually work. So again, it has been extremely difficult to understand why Israel refuses this, even though it's the most logical solution.
Well, we know very well, dear Muhammad, that sometimes the most logical solutions seem at the current time as the most improbable one. And I know that you know very well the situation in Israel and how the mere words occupation and peace, they are outside of the wide consensus. This is something that we have to acknowledge when we start talking and perhaps building trust first on our way when we aiming to approach this serious issue. Ambassador Youssef, I would like to ask you. You already mentioned the issue of Gaza Reconstruction, and also Raif, spoke about it. That there is absolutely will not be a possibility in which Arab world will rebuild time and again Gaza, only for it to be destroyed again. And I would like to ask you, again, this is also deriving from your understanding how the processes in the Arab world work, specifically on the level of the Arab League. How can Arab states contribute to Gaza's reconstruction while ensuring that aid doesn't fall into the wrong hands? This is first of all. And second of all, what are the key challenges and priorities for a post-war reconstruction? I'm not talking only about collecting the money. I think this is actually, although difficult, but perhaps the easier part. How do you envisage yourself? How will it work? How will the mechanisms work? Will it involve the United States? Or is it something that the Arab world will be keen to promote, within, this kind of Middle Eastern frame, along with, of course, Israel and other key players in this region?
So we are assuming that the war would stop and that there would be an approach towards peace in the context of a political horizon. Under these circumstances, then we can talk about all kinds of aspects pertaining to reconstruction, because this has been a requirement that was mentioned by all donors. If we assume that this is the case, then this is not the first time for Gaza to be reconstructed. Hopefully this time around, because of the level of destruction, I hope that we will have a different approach, that this would be built back much better in a manner that accommodates the situation in Gaza, because as you well know, Gaza is one of the most populated areas on earth. So it requires a different approach that would take into consideration the density of the population, environmental requirements, the requirements of society, and so on. And as you also well know, the vast majority of those living in Gaza are refugees from earlier wars. So all this has to be taken into account. Now, we had experiences before with the Gaza reconstruction mechanism. It had huge challenges and difficulties and failures and so on. So we have experience with different mechanisms. Now we will need a different approach that is based on what we have learned. And part of that is also related to Israeli restrictions, because as you well know, one of the most difficult aspects of this issue was the dual use products. And this will continue to be a problem, except if we find a mechanism that would assure both donors and Palestinians and the international community as a whole that the money is being well spent in relation to priorities and that this will not be destroyed again. And you know, and the whole world now by now knows the level of destruction that took place in Gaza in relation to all aspects of life, whether it's in infrastructure, housing, government buildings, schools, universities, you name it. The destruction is unprecedented. Therefore, the effort should also be unprecedented. But we have to find solutions to some of these difficulties that we faced before and benefit from the lessons learned, because this will be crucial. Final point. If we do not succeed in reconstruction, this will result in the total loss of hope for all those living in Gaza. And this will result in another movement that may be much more on the extreme as compared to Hamas or as compared to other groups. So this is a point that is crucial for public opinion to understand, both in Israel and at the international level, because without giving hope to the people living in Gaza in particular at this point in time, they will be up for all kinds of activities that would be extremely destructive to the prospects of peace unless they feel that there is hope in their future.
This is indeed a very grim perspective. And from that, I would also like to go to you, Raif, and ask you about the possible implications of the continuation of the war in Gaza on security and stability of Arab countries, especially those who have normal relations with Israel. So far, we saw that, well, you know, you as an optimist, I'm always obliged to look at the half of the full glass. So no regime collapsed as a result of this. Also, no relations were cut between Arab countries and Israel. But this is 9 months into the war. What will happen if the war will continue, even if it's right now in the current format, for another few months? What if we will be challenged right now with a regional war in the north, which will include Hezbollah in Lebanon, but also probably Syria and also possibly Iraq?
All right, thanks. Look, I mean, building on the actually optimism, let me start with the optimism because before things go downhill, I actually do not think that the peace treaties between Israel and any of its immediate neighbors or the Abraham Accord countries are in jeopardy. Yes, the relations are tense. Yes, we have stress being placed on these relationships. But I think for all of the Arab countries that made peace with Israel, they've made it for their own strategic interest, and these strategic interests have not changed. Yes, it's under, I said, a lot of stress that we see. It's a lot of the political manifestations of peace being toned down, but the core interests have not changed. That said, yes, this war has created a number of challenges, depending on what Arab country you're talking about. I think if you start, the country that I'm most worried about is Jordan, where the Palestinian issue is a domestic issue, not only a foreign policy issue. And yes, the stress is very real. The domestic stress, we see it through demonstrations, etc., but also external stress. We see Iran basically looking at Jordan as, again, the weakest link and doing everything possible to try to undermine it. If you look at other Arab countries, each is being facing their different kind of stress. Many of them basically about diverting interest from their local projects. Look at Saudi Arabia. They wanted to focus on Vision 2030. Right now, this came and became a major distraction and a major diversion of interest and resources. I think what we're seeing in Gaza right now, from a geostrategic point of view, though, will pale if this ends up having more kinetic spillover elsewhere. Meaning, if you have a war in Lebanon, then I think the whole calculation will change. Iran so far has basically been simply a spoiler. You know, they have not been a direct actor. They have worked through their proxies, from the Houthis to Hezbollah to the in Syria and Iraq, to basically raise the tensions. But so far, they remained below the threshold. And you mentioned, you know, the light of fireworks. That was a very calculated, actually, at the end of the day, an Iranian step that was not meant to escalate. If there is a war in Lebanon that involves Hezbollah, this calculation will change. For Iran, Hezbollah is not another proxy. Hezbollah is a key component of its regional security, strategic security architecture, and it will not sit idly as it is faced at. If Iran comes in as a direct fighter, then the whole map, the whole dynamic will change. One last footnote here is that as the war continues, we see that some of the kind of regional dynamics are changing. I would keep a close eye on what's happening in Yemen right now. So far, the Houthis have been focusing only on shipping. Yes, this has been harming Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia, but so far they've actually stayed away from attacking Saudi Arabia. And I think the Iranian, because of the Saudi-Iranian rapprochement, have really kept them down. Right now, we're starting to see signs. The Houthi leader just, I think, yesterday or today, started really talking about targeting Saudi Arabia. So as this the war continues, some of the regional dynamics, because of their own rationales, might metamorphose, might turn into something very different, and we might start seeing independently or independent flare-ups in different parts of the region as this tension goes on.
Thank you very much, Raith. I'm very happy to tell you that we have a lot of questions, excellent questions for all of the panelists. And in order to use our time in the most efficient manner, I will group them into Iran questions, Hamas GCC questions, and so on. So the first group of questions is focused especially in Iran. And this is actually a convenient bridge from what we discussed right now with you, right, to the general question. I will read out a couple of the questions that we were sent. The major issues, this is from Tony Seymour, a major issue is still Iran, the support for Hamas and Hezbollah and their continual supply of weapons. Can anything be done about that? And there is another question about the role of Iran and the role of the ideology of pan-Arabism and how that actually is invisible hand that moves the pieces more than Israel, Hamas, or the Palestinians. Okay, so I would like to focus on Iran and its role. And therefore, Ambassador Yusuf, I would like to address this question to you. Iran, its role, what can be done about it?
Has the role of Iran in as far as the Palestinian-Israeli conflict increased or decreased over the year? It has increased. Initially, the support coming from Iran was for Islamic Jihad. Now, it is also advancing huge assistance to Hamas. If the situation continues to deteriorate, then the situation will worsen. Now, it is up to the whole world, the international community, Israel, the US, the region, and so on, to end this conflict in order to end this role. Without ending this conflict and this role, it will continue. Of course, as Raif said, there is a difference between Hezbollah and the approach of Iran towards Hezbollah and towards Hamas. Now, the US, Egypt, and Israel are discussing ways and means to see how to stop any movement of weapons to Gaza. Okay, will they succeed? Part of it would be coming from other places, perhaps even the Mediterranean and so on. They may succeed, but they may not succeed as well. So Hamas's capability 20 years ago, when they started building rockets and so on, had a range of 1 kilometer. And most of the rockets used to fall inside Gaza. Now the capabilities of Hamas are totally different. Similarly, Israel in its war with Hezbollah in 2006. Hezbollah had capabilities at that time. Now these capabilities are multiplied. So things are getting much worse. And the solution is not always to see how to address this issue militarily. Okay, do you think that a war with Lebanon that is a possibility today with attacking Hezbollah would be a walk in the park, or would be much more difficult than the current war with Gaza? It will be much more difficult because Hamas is one thing and Hezbollah is totally different in as far as capabilities are concerned. So as far as I am concerned, I see the situation as trying to move towards peace. Once you move towards peace, you weaken all the other forces. Yes, you have to take precautions. Yes, Israel's security is important, but so is protection for the Palestinians. So we have to be balanced in our approach. And in order for us to challenge Iran and to ask Iran not to intervene and not to play havoc in the region, we have to say there is progress. You have to demonstrate progress. But just like we are saying that the military solution is not the way, but also Israel proved to the international community, to Palestinians, to the region, that also the approach that was followed by the PA, that was talking about peaceful solution, that was talking about no violence and etc. They weren't able to show any progress to the Palestinians for the last 30 years. So in order for us to achieve progress in dealing with Iran, we have to achieve progress on peace. Otherwise, the situation will get from bad to worse, as we have witnessed in the last 20 plus years.
Thank you very much, Hisham. And Muhammad, the next question is for you. I would also like for you to address the question about Iran, because it's crucial. And I know that you dedicated and your institute dedicated a lot of attention to this question, the role of Iran in this Middle Eastern security architecture and so on. But first, there is a question from Anna Jacobs from the International Crisis Group. What is the view of Arab countries, and particularly GCC states, regarding Hamas and its role in post-war governance in Gaza? What role are GCC states playing in intra-Palestinian reconciliation? And do they support Hamas having a role, I guess some role, in post-war governance in Gaza Strip?
Okay, first of all, hi Anna, thank you for the question. On Hamas, Hamas has been designated as a terrorist organization by the UAE and other countries. That designation didn't change. However, you never find officials today talking about Hamas as a terrorist organization. And this is an indication of the extent or the impact of the current war and how it changed dynamics. And I think the description of Her Excellency Riyam al-Hashmi at the UN of the attack was quite telling. It described the attack as horrendous, it described it as savage, but it didn't describe it as terrorist. So this is an issue connected to the right for self-defense or resistance as per the international law. And as long, this will take us back to the SOS. As long as there is occupation, there will be no, there will be no security. They have the right. This is exactly the same thing that Iran right now is using. It's using the right of the Palestinian people to defend themselves against occupation. It was a mistake by Israel in 2006 when they withdrew from Lebanon that they kept the Shafaa farm. If they didn't keep the Shafaa farm, then Hezbollah would not have been a resistant movement until today. And I think this is a mistake that we're possibly going to repeat again with Hamas. Now, your question of the role of Hamas in a post-Gaza. Again, I go back to this concept of de-Hamasification. And I use this because we know how de-Baathification, sort of developed in Iraq. It didn't work. And it created far more problems that Iraq is suffering until today. I think this is a huge, again, mistake because of the way of discriminating between who is Hamas and who is not Hamas. And again, there has been solutions. There were times when certain Hamas leaders said that we are willing to go under the PLO, which means practically, dismantling Hamas as and become part of a larger umbrella. And this could have been a fantastic solution to start with. And if there is, again, if we've got an ignition, if Israel acknowledges a state and says we want to work towards a state, the whole dynamics of who is there in leadership is going to change. So currently, because of the occupation, the people who are on the forefront are people who can carry weapons, who can plot attacks. But if we've got a state, and as Ghaith was explaining, there will be a whole different range of capacities required that will make people who hold or carry weapons go to the back, if not outside the picture. And I think this is what is now lost in our discussion. And Ksenia, I know that you are one of the very few people who dare to tell the king that he's naked. But I think this is a tough job, but somebody has to do it.
Yes, dear Muhammad, we are not looking for easy ways. Yeah, right. There are two questions. I will address both of them to you from Judy Snitzer. And there is another very interesting question that I will use it for you to basically summarize our discussion and to perhaps give our viewers and listeners some hope for the future. But first, right to you. In the discussion today of a two-state solution, is it still presented as the first step in the elimination of Israel, as the problem is presented as one of occupation, which is usually applied to all of Israel? And there is another one, also from Judy. Why did the 2005 disengagement from Gaza did not provide hope for the Palestinians?
Thanks. Actually, can I just quickly, one word on Iran? I hear, because I'm much more hawkish than my colleagues. I believe without Iran paying a direct price for its bad behavior, Iran will continue with its bad behavior. And a direct price means that they have to lose. Not, we always say Iran will fight till the last Arab. I think Iran will have to see some of its own assets being damaged. Otherwise, it will continue playing badly. And I'm not saying that the region can do that. None of the region, including Israel, can do that. The US has to take the lead on this. A two-state solution as a way of destroying Israel? Absolutely not. I think it's the exact opposite. The whole idea of a two-state solution, and why I think, by the way, it's the only solution, is that this is the only way that each national group, the Palestinians and the Jewish people as a people, achieve their self-determination through a state of their own. It's only through a two-state solution that you can have Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people, in the same way that you can have a state of Palestine as the homeland of the Palestinian people. So to my mind, if you're interested in the survival in the future of either the Palestinian people or the Jewish people as a political survival, I would say the only solution is a two-state solution towards that. Yes, some people say, when they say the word occupation, mean all of Israel, but that is a minority. When we talk about a two-state solution, whether as diplomats or as people who've been involved in this in a while, we clearly mean Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people as it defines itself. It's up to Israel to define itself, and Palestine as the state of the Palestinian people. So to my mind, I repeat myself and I say the only way that you can have a stable future for either the Jewish people or the Palestinian people is through a two-state solution. Other than that, you will end up either with perpetual conflict or a morphed conflict, or frankly, a state that will, be neither Jewish nor Palestinian, and therefore will be in constant state of civil war. So that's one. On the 2005 disengagement, I actually, look, I mean, there's obviously many reasons. It's a very complex phenomenon. One, I would say, related to Israel's behavior. I mean, I was a Palestinian official at that point, and I remember spending a lot of time basically trying to convince the Israelis, the prime minister and his team, to show it as a negotiated process, because that would have allowed us to take credit for it. But because it was unilateral, Hamas managed to frame it as an Israeli defeat and an Israeli response to violence. So that was part of the Israeli side. But also, I have to say that a huge mistake was done by the Palestinian Authority. At the end of the day, rather than taking this as an opportunity, rather than actually doing what we had to do in terms of both imposing law and order, because the Palestinian Authority, when it took over Gaza after Israel went out, was not serious about security. There were many cases where, starting from really day two of the disengagement, when Hamas came in and took over some of the evacuated settlements, destroyed some of them, and the PA did nothing, that sent the wrong message. But also the Palestinian Authority failed to spend time investing in upgrading governance, infrastructure, etc. In Gaza. So I think this is one of the lessons that one has to learn in the kind of the day after. In the day after, if the, let's say, positive forces fail to deliver to the people in Gaza a degree of reconstruction, a degree of ability to start picking the pieces of their lives and building normal lives again. If you do not provide not only hope in a conceptual, theoretical, abstract way, but hope in a very concrete way in terms of good, clean, effective governance, and in terms of concretely, physically, visibly showing Gazans that their lives are changing for the better, this is simply a recipe for, as I think both Hisham and Mohammed said, for either the re-emergence of Hamas, or even worse, the emergence of something that is even more nihilistic than Hamas.
Thank you very much, Raith. Our last question would be also a call for you to talk a little bit about not only the dangers and the warnings, but also the path for peace, which is actually part of the title of this webinar. So the question is addressed at Mohammed, but I will address it to each. Given the current circumstances, which steps should be taken to move towards a long-term vision for peace, and especially what is the role, well, this is for you, Mohammed, of the UAE, but also other Gulf states in this process? If keep it short, and please give us hope. I would like to start with Mohammed, with you, and then Ambassador Mohammed, and Ambassador Hisham, and then Raith. Okay.
Honestly, I think the first step should come from Israel. And if Israel says, I am willing to engage with the Arab states on the Arab Peace Initiative, this is about time, I think that will change the whole dynamics. That's what Israel needs to do. Just say, this is an initiative that would require talking about it. We are engaged, we would like to be engaged with it. And I think that will start. Gaza day after could be part of that delivery of that process, but and it needs to be part of what leads to a process. That's the seventh lineman who's talking about state investment in states. But this is the first thing that we need. If Israel comes out and say, we believe in the Arab Peace Initiative, we need that long-lasting peace would only come through a two-state solution. We need to engage, not accept, but engage at the first state. And I think that would start changing the dynamics. And it would start a conversation, not only between Israel and the Arab states, but also between the Palestinians internally. And then maybe this is the part that Anna was asking about, is that what would be the role of reconciliation? I think that would enable reconciliation, because now all the Palestinian factions have something to build towards. Right now, they only have differences.
Right, please, Ambassador Hisham.
Well, I agree with what was mentioned by Mohammed. You know, squarely, the ball is in Israel's court in as far as saying what the end game should look like. Of course, Israel's security is important, but at the same time, the situation is untenable, and the status quo that some in Israel feel can continue forever, it has proven time and again that it cannot continue. Now there is a choice, and the question is a question of framing. Of course, Israel can say, well, we cannot talk about a state because this would be a prize for Hamas. Yes, that can be a framing that is being used now, but they can also have another framing and say, okay, now that we have had this war and Hamas was weakened, this is a time to find a solution. So it depends on how this is going to be approached. But I think it has become very clear that the objective of some circles in Israel that, you know, Palestinians have to surrender is not going to happen. And if this is recognized by the leadership in Israel, that I hope we will have a leadership that would be willing to talk about the prospects of peace and advancing towards something that is sustainable, similar to what took place between Israel and Egypt, Israel and Jordan, and as a matter of fact, even between Israel and Lebanon in relation to the maritime borders. So Arab countries have proven that when they sign agreements, they respect their agreements. And I think that this is an important message that Israelis have to deal with, because there has been recognition and respect for what is agreed and what is signed by Arab countries.
Yes, indeed. Right, please.
Look, I mean, I agree with my colleagues that Israel has to signal very clearly that it is committed to an end game of a two-state solution. That's obvious, and unfortunately, that's not going to happen while the current Israeli government is in place. But I don't want to let the Palestinians off the hook either, because frankly, if the Palestinians do not get their act together in creating a capable government, in proving to the Israelis and to the region as well that a Palestinian state that will be created will not be a failed state. And this will not only fail to get support from the Israelis. Frankly, I don't see the Jordanians or the Egyptians wanting a failed state on their border either. And I don't see the GCC willing to invest in, the corruption and inefficiency and ineffectiveness that we see in the Palestinian system. So yes, the Israelis have their role and it's key, but the Palestinians also have the role and they have to signal this. And in this sense, Gaza will be a true test case to whether the Palestinian system has learned the lessons and is willing to play this role. I think if they show positive signs, again, from every conversation I've had with Arab officials from the Gulf and the Levant and elsewhere, everyone understands the urgency, but without the Palestinians being willing to do it, they will not come in and force them to do it. One last point here, though, and I think it's very important. Look, the GCC is key. There's no doubt about that. The GCC is the most dynamic place in the Arab world right now, and it is slowly it's becoming the center of gravity. Yet we should not ignore the other parts of the Arab world. At the end of the day, by dint of geography and history and geostrategic issues, no solution can be advanced without Jordan and Egypt being part of this solution. And I think sometimes at least I see it in Washington. There's like, Jordan and Egypt are so passé and the Gulf is the new shiny thing. That's a poor reading of the geostrategy. And I think what we need is an integrated regional approach to resolving this problem.
Absolutely. I second that about the importance of countries with whom we have borders with Israel. That proved over the decades of years now to be trustworthy and stable partners. The road for peace, as we can see during this short webinar, is thorny and it's difficult. But I would like to remind to everyone that the road to war, it's quicker, but the consequences are much more dire. Therefore, we have to take the road. As much as thorny and as much as problematic it is, because it's the only path. It's the only path that we can take. I would like to thank our distinguished panelists, Raith, Hisham, and Muhammad for participation. I would like to thank Buhuth for wonderful collaboration, and I hope for many others in the future. And I would like to remind also that we in Ropes believe with all our hearts that there is only one way to provide for peace and security in this region. This is a two-state solution and full integration of Israel and Palestine in the Middle East into the fabric of the Arab world with as equals, not as enemies, not as needy, parts and so on, as equals to be integrated and to work together for the new architecture of security and stability and peace here in this region. Our future delegation in ropes of young leaders from Israel, Palestine, and across the Middle East will take place in Azerbaijan, in Baku, in this August. And this is our small contribution for the work of peace, to bring together people who otherwise would not meet and who should work together for the sake of themselves, their children, future generations, and all of us to create a different future for all of us here in the Middle East. I encourage you to follow Ropes at ropes.org and our website and in the social media. Thank you very much. Invest in a new Middle East. Help us build together a better future for ourselves. And we will be happy to meet you again in our series of webinars about the Middle East, about the connections between the different countries in it, and collaborations for the sake of one purpose only, peace and security. Thank you very much. Shalom and salam. Thank you very much, friends, for excellent participation.
Thank you. That was I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thank you all. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Illa likain karib. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.